There's a belief, buried deep in the bedrock of every working man's soul, that if you just push harder, if you just keep adding another task to the pile, if you just spin every single plate you can get your hands on, eventually, something good has to break through. That sheer, unadulterated effort, multiplied across every single obligation, every worry, every potential opportunity, is the only real path to a life worth having. And for a long, long time, Vince believed it with every fiber of his being. He wasn't wrong, exactly, just incomplete. He understood effort, knew it intimately, but hadn't yet learned the brutal, beautiful truth about leverage. Vince, he was one of those men you probably pass a dozen times a week without a second glance. 47 years old, a factory man through and through, the kind whose life felt forged in the heat and hum of industry. He worked at the stamping plant on the edge of town, where they churned out parts for everything from lawnmowers to washing machines. You'd see him walking out at the end of a shift, even on a warm summer evening, and the weariness was etched into the subtle slump of his broad shoulders, the way his heavy boots hit the pavement. It wasn't a defeated weariness, not exactly, more like a persistent, quiet hum that settled in his bones. His face was a roadmap of responsibilities and early mornings. Lines fanned out from the corners of his eyes, not just from laughter, but from years of squinting at schematics, of staring into the bright glare of welding sparks, of just plain watching the world go by with a careful, observational intensity. His jaw was often set, not in anger, but in the kind of quiet determination that comes from knowing what needs to be done, even when you'd rather be doing something else. His dark hair, thinning slightly at the crown, was usually dusted with a fine layer of the plant's ambient grit, a testament to the fact that he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, or his head, for that matter. But it was his hands that truly told the story of Vince. Knuckles thick and scarred, fingernails perpetually grimed beneath the quick, no matter how hard he scrubbed them after his shift. They weren't just the hands of a man who operated machines. They were the hands of a man who understood them, who could feel the subtle vibration of a bearing about to go bad, who knew the precise torque needed for a perfect weld. They were strong, calloused, dependable hands, capable of fixing almost anything. Yet lately, they seemed to carry more than just the day's work. They carried the invisible weight of bills, of tuition that was always around the corner, of the quiet hopes and unspoken worries of his wife, Sarah, and their two kids, Emily and Jacob. Vince was a listener, not a talker. He wouldn't jump into conversations, but if you said something, you knew he'd heard it. His nods were slow, considered, and when he did speak, his words were few but carried a practical weight like well-chosen tools. He never complained, not really. What was the point? Complaining didn't fix anything, didn't make the next paycheck appear any faster. On the surface, he was a rock, a steady pillar, dependable as the sunrise. But beneath that reserved exterior, a quiet storm brewed. There was the constant, low thrum of anxiety about providing enough, about being enough. He harbored a secret ambition, not for grand riches or fame, but for a simple, unshakable stability, a peace that felt perpetually out of reach. And sometimes, in the quietest hours, a simmering doubt would surface, a nasty whisper asking if he was truly capable of more, or if this hard, grinding life was simply all he was cut out for. The silence of the pre-dawn dark was broken each weekday by the unforgiving screech of his alarm clock. 5 o'clock. Always 5. A low groan, a reflex more than a conscious choice, was his only protest against the tyranny of the clock. Vince swung his heavy legs out of bed, the floorboards groaning in sympathy beneath his weight. Sarah would stir slightly, pull the duvet closer, and drift back into the soft comfort of sleep. He envied her those extra minutes, that brief escape from the harsh reality already pressing down on his shoulders. The smell of stale coffee from the pot he'd set up the night before was his first comfort. He'd pour a mug, black, strong, and sit at the worn kitchen table, staring out at the inky blackness beyond the window. The house was quiet then, a fragile peace before the morning rush. He'd hear the gentle hum of the old refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall, and the silent ticking of his own anxieties. Rent, mortgage, car payment, Emily's braces, Jacob's new cleats, the rising grocery bill. A mental ledger that never balanced, always seemed to lean heavy on the debit side. By 5:30 a.m., he was in his beat-up Ford F-150, the suspension sighing under its age, rumbling down the quiet streets of their working-class neighborhood, past identical ranch houses, each with a small patch of lawn and a porch light barely illuminating the path. Other headlights, solitary and determined, passed him in the opposite direction, other men and women heading to their own early shifts, chasing their own versions of the American dream or simply outrunning the nightmares. The factory floor was a beast that woke up slowly, grumbling into life. By the time Vince clocked in at 6 a.m., the giant presses were already thudding, the conveyor belts clattering, and the air thick with the smell of metal dust and hydraulic fluid. His station, the big hydraulic press, waited for him. Load the sheet of steel, press the dual safety buttons, watch the behemoth descend with a hiss and a groan, shaping the raw material into part after part, identical, relentless. Hours melted into a blur of motion and noise. Load, press, unload, stack, repeat. His movements were fluid, honed by years of repetition, his mind often elsewhere, calculating, worrying, planning. Lunch was a 30-minute reprieve, spent hunched over a thermos of lukewarm soup and a sandwich, the roar of the factory muffled but never truly absent. He'd scroll through his phone, looking at local ads for scrap metal, checking the balance of their meager checking account, the knot in his stomach tightening with each digit. There was never enough. There was always another bill, another unexpected expense, another reason to push harder, to work longer. This was his fundamental belief, that if he just put in more hours, tried more avenues, said yes to every opportunity for a dime, he could finally outrun the deficit. When he finally pulled into his driveway around 5 p.m., sometimes later if he'd managed an extra half shift, the exhaustion was bone-deep. Sarah would be in the kitchen, dinner simmering, the scent a warm welcome. Emily would be glued to her phone, Jacob kicking a worn soccer ball against the garage door. This was the peace he yearned for, these brief moments of ordinary life. But even then, his mind wasn't truly at rest. After dinner, after helping Jacob with his math homework and listening to Emily recount her day, after the kids were finally settled, Vince would retreat to his garage. This was his second job, his side hustle, fixing lawnmowers, small engines, anything with a carburetor and a pull cord. He'd spent countless evenings, weekends, poring over manuals, getting grease under his fingernails, turning wrenches in the dim light of a single bare bulb. He'd convinced himself this extra effort, this additional stream of income was the key. He'd say, "Every little bit helps, Sarah, every single bit." And Sarah, bless her heart, would just nod, a tired smile on her face, knowing he was trying, even if he came to bed smelling of gasoline and exhaust, long after she'd fallen asleep. This relentless pursuit of more wasn't just about providing for his family. It was tangled up in something deeper, something that gnawed at him when the house was finally quiet. Inside Vince, buried under the calluses and the daily grind, was the ghost of a younger man, a man who'd dreamt of more than just surviving. He remembered the eager kid who'd taken shop class, who'd loved the feeling of building something, creating something with his own two hands. He'd imagined a business of his own, maybe, a small fabrication shop where he could be his own boss, where his ingenuity counted for more than just turning a lever. But somewhere along the way, life had gotten in the way. Responsibility had piled up, demands had grown, and the path to security had seemed to narrow to a single, worn track. Work harder, do more, carry the weight yourself. He felt like a hamster on a wheel, running faster and faster, but never actually getting anywhere. The gap between the proud, capable man he saw in the mirror on a good day and the perpetually exhausted, financially strapped man who felt constantly on the verge of falling behind, that gap haunted him. It was a silent accusation, a question whispered in the dark. Is this all there is? Are you truly capable of more, or are you just good at pushing rocks uphill? He never articulated these fears, not to Sarah, not to his kids, certainly not to his buddies at the factory. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging he wasn't strong enough, capable enough, man enough. He was the provider, the fixer, the rock. And rocks, he figured, didn't ask for help. They just stood there, stoic, enduring the erosion, silently taking on every burden, convinced that the sheer volume of his effort spread across every single task, every single responsibility, every single side hustle was the only way to keep the machine of his life from grinding to a halt. He was active, perpetually moving, always doing. But effectiveness, that was a luxury he didn't have time to consider. Not yet, anyway. He had too many buttons to push. The insistent buzz of the alarm clock, set for 5:00 a.m., wasn't a jolt for Vince. It was more like a sigh, the first one of the day. He'd usually been awake for a while already, lying in the dim pre-dawn quiet, his mind already churning through the day's ledger. Not a ledger of numbers, not exactly, but of tasks, of worries, of all the things that needed doing. The hum of the old refrigerator, the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, these were the sounds of his home, and the silent backdrop to his internal tally. He'd swing his feet to the worn rug beside the bed, the familiar stiffness in his lower back a constant companion. A quick shower, the water barely hot enough to cut through the chill of the morning, then downstairs for the ritual. Strong black coffee, a slice of toast eaten standing up, scanning the kitchen counter for any stray bills that might have surfaced overnight, like unexpected weeds in a carefully tended garden. Sarah would still be asleep, a rare blessing of stillness in their house. Emily, his 16-year-old, would be buried under her duvet, dreaming teenage dreams he no longer understood. Jacob, 12, probably still wrestling imaginary dragons in his sleep. Vince envied their oblivion for a moment, then pushed it away. Someone had to be awake, had to be ready. By 5:45 a.m., he was in the driver's seat of his old Ford F-150, the engine grumbling to life with a familiar cough and sputter. The worn steering wheel felt like an extension of his own calloused hands. The drive to the factory was a blur of familiar turns, streetlights painting fleeting halos on the rain-slicked asphalt. He knew every pothole, every bump, every faded billboard along the route. For 25 years it had been the same. The factory stood like a sleeping beast on the edge of town, its brick walls stained with decades of grime and industry. Inside, the smell of grease and metal dust was as comforting as it was oppressive. His work on the assembly line was a masterclass in repetitive motion. Day in, day out, he fastened the same component, twisted the same bolt, pressed the same lever. His movements were fluid, precise, honed by years of practice. He could do it blindfolded and often felt like he did, his mind miles away even as his hands performed their dance. The clatter and bang of machinery, the shouts of foremen, the hum of fluorescent lights, it was the soundtrack to his life. He was good at it, damn good. He took pride in the perfect alignment, the secure fit, the knowledge that his part in the grand machine was solid. But pride, he found, didn't pay for new shoes for Emily, or the increasing cost of Jacob's baseball league, or the ever-present shadow of the mortgage payment. Money. It was the low, constant thrum beneath every thought, every decision. Every evening after dinner, while Sarah helped the kids with homework or tidied up, Vince would retreat to the small desk in the corner of their bedroom. His glasses perched on his nose, a faded ledger open before him, he'd pore over the bills, the bank statements, the grocery receipts. He'd track every penny, squeeze every dollar, convinced that hypervigilance was the only way to stay afloat. He calculated the extra shifts he picked up, the small cash payments from fixing a neighbor's sputtering lawnmower on the weekends. He'd even considered delivering pizzas, but where would he find the time? Every effort, every spare moment was meticulously allocated, not for enjoyment or rest, but for survival. His small side hustle, fixing anything with an engine for a few bucks, was less a passion and more another anchor, another strain on his already depleted energy reserves, pulling him further into the quicksand of endless tasks. Beneath the surface of this relentless grind, a different kind of burden weighed on him. Not the physical ache of tired muscles, but a deeper, more insidious pain. He had dreams once, bigger than a spotless record at the factory. Dreams of building something of his own, maybe a small workshop, something where he could design, create, bring an idea to life from scratch. He saw himself as a man who understood how things worked, who could innovate, not just endlessly repeat. He wanted to give his family more than just stability. He wanted to give them possibility, a life where the shadow of financial worry didn't stretch so long and cold. But those dreams felt buried now, suffocated under the weight of grocery lists and utility bills and car repairs. They were ghosts that sometimes flickered in the quiet moments, like dust motes dancing in a stray beam of sunlight. They left him with a gnawing doubt, a quiet terror that he was failing, not just to achieve his ambitions, but to truly provide. Was he just a cog in the machine? Was this all he was good for? The gap between the vibrant, hopeful young man who started at the factory and the weary, methodical man he saw in the mirror each morning was a chasm. He looked at his hands, strong and capable, and wondered if they were meant for more than turning a lever. The quiet pride he had in his work was constantly at war with the simmering doubt that he was truly capable of more, that he was capable of enough. He didn't complain, not out loud. He just kept pushing, kept doing. Because that's what a man did. He kept all the plates spinning, all the buttons pushed, convinced that if he just worked harder, if he just took on one more thing, eventually he'd break through. He'd fix enough lawnmowers, work enough overtime, save enough pennies, and that elusive peace, that unburdened stability would finally be his. He just had to keep pushing every button all the time. He didn't see the battery draining, only the sheer volume of things he was still managing to do. He was active, perpetually moving, always doing. But effectiveness, that was a luxury he didn't have time to consider. Not yet, anyway. He had too many buttons to push. And every single one of them felt essential. It began, as these things often do, not with a bang, but with a series of small, unsettling tremors that rapidly escalated into a full-blown earthquake. One Tuesday morning, the factory floor was humming its usual monotonous tune, and Vince was midway through a particularly stubborn calibration on a milling machine. His hands, caked with grease and confidence, moved with the practiced rhythm of 2 decades. Then his cell phone, tucked into his work pants pocket, buzzed with an unfamiliar urgency. It was the school nurse. "Mr. Miller, it's about Emily." His blood ran cold. The clatter of the machinery faded, replaced by the frantic thumping in his own chest. Emily, his rock-steady, bright daughter. The nurse's voice was calm, too calm, speaking about dizziness, a sudden severe headache, a faint. They'd called Sarah first, but she hadn't answered. She was at her volunteer shift at the library, phone off. Vince was the next contact. They were calling an ambulance. The world tilted. He barked to his foreman, a gruff, understanding nod his only reply, and was out the door. The drive to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and gut-wrenching scenarios. Every stoplight felt like an eternity, every second a betrayal. His mind raced, calculating. Time off, lost wages, what this would cost. But beneath the practical anxieties, a deeper, colder fear gnawed. Emily. He found Sarah in the emergency waiting room, pale and shaken, clutching a crumpled tissue. Emily was being seen. Hours crawled by, marked by the smell of antiseptic and the low murmur of other people's crises. When the doctor finally came out, his face was kind but serious. It wasn't life-threatening, not immediately. But it was serious enough to warrant tests, follow-up, specialist visits, a complex chronic condition they suspected, manageable with careful monitoring and medication, and significant costs. The relief that washed over Vince was immense, a wave that almost buckled his knees. Emily was going to be okay. But right on its heels came the crushing weight of the how. How would they afford it? How would they juggle the appointments? The fear for his daughter blended with the cold, hard reality of the bills already piling up in his mind. He picked up his truck from the factory lot, a weary sigh escaping him. Just as he turned onto the main road, a violent shudder ripped through the old Ford. A sickening clunk from beneath the hood, a puff of acrid smoke, and then nothing. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died, leaving him stranded, dead in the water, blocking traffic. The timing felt like a cruel cosmic joke. His reliable old workhorse, the vehicle that shuttled him to overtime, delivered parts for the lawnmower hustle, carried his family, had just given up the ghost. He got it towed, the mechanic's estimate a punch to the gut. The cost was astronomical, more than the truck was even worth. Without it, his entire system collapsed. How would he get to work? How would he pick up parts for the lawnmowers? That small side hustle, that extra income he'd meticulously built, suddenly revealed itself as a brittle house of cards. He'd been so busy trying to keep it going, pouring spare hours and what little profit he made back into repairing broken mowers and sourcing parts, that he hadn't noticed it was running on fumes, losing money faster than it earned. The big engine repair he'd been putting off, the expensive blades he'd ordered for a new client who never paid, it all surfaced now, a ledger in the red. In the span of 2 days, everything he thought he had under control had unraveled. His daughter's health, his transportation, his supposed safety net side hustle, all simultaneously plunged into crisis. He was working harder than ever, trying to push every single button, and yet he felt closer to ruin than he ever had before. The sheer volume of things he thought he had to do, fix the truck, keep the lawnmowers going, cover medical bills, maintain his primary job, stay on top of household chores, was no longer a list of tasks. It was a suffocating blanket, heavy and impossible to lift. He was active, yes, perpetually moving, but he was utterly helpless, overwhelmed by the crushing inertia of his own effort. That night's sleep was a cruel joke. Sarah was curled beside him, her breathing shallow, finally succumbed to exhaustion, but Vince lay rigidly awake. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed a steady 3:07 a.m. It felt like the hour before the world properly wakes, a liminal space where shadows dance and fears loom largest. He slipped out of bed, the familiar creak of the floorboards under his weight a loud intrusion in the oppressive silence of the house. He wandered into the kitchen, the cool linoleum floor a shock against his bare feet. He didn't turn on a light. The faint glow from the streetlights outside filtered through the window, painting the familiar space in shades of gray. He sat at the kitchen table, the worn oak surface cool beneath his calloused palms. He usually loved this table, the anchor of their family meals, homework sessions, shared laughter. Tonight it felt like an interrogation table. The silence was deafening. Amplified every thought, every worry, every sickening crunch of collapsing plans. He replayed the day. Emily's pale face, the doctor's grave words, the wrenching sound of his truck dying, the mechanic's casual pronouncement of doom. The broken lawnmower engine still sitting in his garage, a monument to a failing ambition. "What have I done?" He whispered into the darkness, the words dry and rasping. His voice sounded alien, thin and reedy. He had always believed in the power of sheer effort. More hours, more tasks, more pushing. That was the mantra that had guided his entire adult life. He'd worn it like a badge of honor, proof of his unwavering commitment. But now, looking at the wreckage, the truth was a bitter pill. He was pushing every button all the time, just like he thought he was supposed to, and the machine wasn't moving forward. It was stalling, sputtering, actively collapsing. His chest tightened, a cold knot of despair forming in his gut. He had worked so hard, harder than anyone he knew. He'd sacrificed sleep, leisure, even his peace of mind, all in the name of providing, of building that elusive stability. And for what? To be sitting here in the dark at 3 a.m., closer to financial ruin than he'd been in a decade, utterly spent and completely useless. The quiet pride he usually felt in his grit, his ability to manage everything, had evaporated. All that was left was a searing shame. Shame that he couldn't protect his family from this, shame that his tireless effort hadn't just failed to prevent it, but had arguably contributed to it by spreading him too thin. He had been so focused on turning every lever, cranking every dial, he'd never stopped to ask if they were even connected to the engine that mattered. He just kept pushing, convinced that eventually something would give. And something had. His world. He felt the prick of tears behind his eyes, a sensation so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. Vince Miller didn't cry. He worked. He fixed things. But tonight there was nothing to fix, and he was too broken to work. He was just a man, stripped bare, exposed to the raw, freezing truth. His life, his effort, his entire strategy had led him to this dark, desperate place. He was not just active, he was frantically active. And he was completely, devastatingly ineffective. The weight of his responsibilities, which he'd always carried with quiet resilience, felt like a millstone around his neck, dragging him under. He stared out the window at the empty street, watching the pale moonlight cast long, lonely shadows, and felt utterly, tragically lost. This couldn't be all there was. This couldn't be what his life had become. The emptiness wasn't just in the street outside. It had seeped into the marrow of his bones. Slumped back against the headboard, his usually capable hands feeling heavy and useless in his lap. He looked at them, calloused, scarred, etched with a lifetime of labor, and saw not strength but futility. Every extra hour, every patched-up engine, every meticulously balanced ledger had amounted to this. A hospital bill that would sink them, a broken truck, a wife recovering, and 2 kids who deserved more than a dad who was always tired, always worried, just treading water. A deep, shuddering breath escaped him, not a sob, but a raw expulsion of the suffocating weight in his chest. "Enough," he whispered, barely audible. Not an angry shout, but a hollow, weary admission. Enough of this frantic, pointless scramble. Enough of doing everything, trying to be everywhere, splitting himself into 1,000 ineffective pieces. He didn't know what came next. The path ahead was fog. The path ahead was fog-choked, yes, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Vince wasn't trying to drive through it at full speed, juggling 3 maps and a coffee in one hand. He was simply standing still. The decision, whispered into the quiet dawn, resonated with a strange, hollow relief. Enough. The next morning, day 1 of whatever this new thing was, felt like walking with a limp. The 5 a.m. alarm still screamed, but there was no immediate surge of adrenaline, no mental checklist already halfway complete. He didn't pull on his work pants and then instinctively grab his dusty tool belt for the morning's side hustle. He just didn't. His hands, accustomed to the familiar weight of a wrench or a ledger, felt strangely light, almost useless. He went to the factory, clocked in, and for the first time in years he focused solely on the stamping machine in front of him. No mental calculations about lawnmower profits, no worrying about the leaky faucet at home, no replaying Sarah's medical bills. Just the rhythmic thump-clank of the press. He paid attention to the feed, the calibration, the subtle hum that told him it was running right. He found himself thinking about how to shave off a microsecond from the cycle, how to make the material flow smoother, how to reduce waste. It felt almost quiet in his head, and profoundly unnerving. Coming home, the garage door stayed down. He didn't even glance at it. He helped Sarah bring in groceries, a small thing he often delegated in his frantic schedule, and sat with Jacob while he did homework. Later, as Emily talked about her day, he actually listened, truly listened, without his mind racing ahead to the next task. It felt unnatural. It felt like he was forgetting something crucial, like he was letting something slide. The quiet in his mind was so loud it almost hurt. Day 3, the old habits began to claw. He woke up with that familiar buzz of anxiety, the phantom weight of responsibilities pressing down. He found himself halfway to the garage after dinner, a wrench suddenly heavy in his hand before he stopped dead. What was he doing? There were no mowers waiting, no side jobs. He stood there staring at the closed garage door, the silence mocking him. His mind, used to the frantic pace, screamed, "You're slacking. You're wasting time." It felt like quitting, not simplifying. He fought the urge to open the door, pull out an old engine just to do something. Anything. Stood there, knuckles white on the wrench, until Sarah called him in for coffee. He put the wrench down, slowly, deliberately. By day 7, the internal battle was a low, constant hum. He tried to focus on one specific aspect of his factory job, optimizing the press he worked on, really digging into the maintenance logs, talking to the veteran mechanics, understanding its quirks. But the allure of the tangible, immediate, though ultimately unprofitable, side hustles was strong. A neighbor called asking if he could take a look at their leaky sprinkler system. Vince's mouth opened to say, "Sure, I can swing by after work." The old instinct kicking in like a reflex. He caught himself. "No, I'm sorry, I can't right now," he heard himself say, the words feeling foreign and prickly on his tongue. A wave of guilt washed over him. He was letting people down. He was being selfish. That night, sleep was fitful. He kept dreaming of endless to-do lists, each item mocking him, each undone task a tiny failure. He felt like a man who'd suddenly stopped rowing a sinking boat, only to realize he was still drifting, still going down, just slower. His old self, the frantic doer, whispered in his ear, "See, this isn't working. You have to do more. You have to try harder." Day 14, 2 full weeks. He still felt the pull, the magnetic draw of distraction, of the thousand small things he could be doing. He started getting to the factory earlier, using that extra half hour to read the manuals for his machine, to observe the other operators, to truly understand the nuances. He'd even taken some online courses offered by the company, something he'd always dismissed as extra work he didn't have time for. But the rest of his life felt empty, almost reckless in its lack of constant motion. He found himself pacing in the evenings, feeling a nervous energy that used to be channeled into repairs or paperwork. He'd even tried to help Emily with her math, only to realize he was just hovering, feeling unproductive. Sarah, watching him, her own recovery slow but steady, gently suggested he go for a walk. "You're used to always doing something, Vince. Maybe you just need to learn how to be." Her words, simple as they were, hit him hard. He was fighting himself, fighting the deeply ingrained belief that his worth was directly tied to his output. This wasn't just about stopping side hustles. It was about reprogramming his entire internal operating system. The process was agonizing. It felt like pulling teeth every single day. He hadn't failed, not completely, but he hadn't yet felt the surge of unstoppable growth either. He just felt tired. A new kind of tired, though, a weary satisfaction mixed with the constant urge to revert. He was in the thick of the battle, and the only thing keeping him going was the raw, stubborn memory of that 3 a.m. despair. He wouldn't go back there, not for anything. The exhaustion lingered, a phantom limb of his old life, a memory of constant movement that still tugged at him, but after nearly a month, something subtle began to shift. One Tuesday, during a particularly complex setup on the line, Vince found himself observing the old lead operator, Stan, not with his usual hurried impatience, but with a quiet, almost meditative focus. Stan, a man who moved with the grace of decades spent on the factory floor, made an adjustment, a barely perceptible twist of a dial, and the massive machine, which had been rattling stubbornly, hummed into perfect calibration. Vince, remembering his manual reading, realized why Stan did it. It wasn't just a motion, it was a principle, a fundamental understanding of the machinery's inner workings. Later that day, faced with a similar issue on his own machine, Vince didn't panic. He paused. He thought, picturing Stan's deliberate movements. He made that adjustment a mirror of what he'd seen. And it worked. A clean run, no downtime, no wasted material. A small victory maybe in the grand scheme of the factory, but a surge of profound clarity ran through him. He saw the ripple effect. Saved time, less stress, increased output. Stan, passing by, stopped for a moment, his weathered eyes meeting Vince's. "Good eye, Vince. he said, a rare, almost gruff compliment. "You're finally seeing it, ain't you?" That night he came home, tired but not defeated. Not the old, bone-deep defeated feeling that used to cling to him like factory dust. He found Jacob struggling with a Lego set, tiny plastic bricks scattered in a chaotic heap. Instead of just fixing it for him or telling him to, "Figure it out," Vince sat down. He didn't build it for Jacob, but helped him identify the key interlocking pieces, the foundational supports needed before adding the decorative flourishes. He saw the connection, a quiet echo of his own realization at work. Sarah, watching from the kitchen, noticed the absence of the usual tension lines around his mouth. He wasn't rushing. He was present. She leaned against the doorframe, a soft, weary smile on her face that still held a spark. "You seem lighter, honey," she murmured. Weeks turned into months. Vince didn't become a different man overnight, but he was certainly changing, slowly, irrevocably. The frantic, diffused energy that had defined him had settled into a deep, steady hum, like a well-oiled machine. He was still the first one at the factory, but now he spent those extra minutes strategically, not just hurrying. He'd become the guy Stan would sometimes consult with on tricky machine issues, the one who could explain the why behind the how. His focused efforts had started to pay dividends. His efficiency numbers were consistently up, and a quiet word from his supervisor about a potential lead position had stirred a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Genuine hope, not just for survival, but for advancement. At home, the side hustle tools sat gathering dust in the garage, a silent monument to his old way of thinking. He didn't miss them. He missed the idea of them less and less. Now, evenings weren't about fixing leaky pipes or wrestling with faulty lawnmowers. They were about sitting at the dinner table, truly listening to Emily talk about school or patiently helping Jacob with his math. He even started taking Sarah on walks again, just around the neighborhood, holding her hand, talking about their day, not just the endless cascade of bills. The medical debt, once an overwhelming mountain, was slowly but steadily receding. They were making progress not through frantic effort in 100 directions, but through concentrated effort where it mattered most, creating a real, tangible change in their lives. One Saturday, a neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, stopped by. "Vince," he said, scratching his head, "my mower's on the fritz. Heard you used to fix 'em. Any chance you could take a look?" Vince paused, the old impulse to say, "Yes," rearing its head. He remembered the feeling of obligation, the automatic mental calculation of the meager extra cash versus the lost time, the exhausted evenings. He looked at Sarah, then at Emily, who was laughing with Jacob over a board game in the living room, their joy a bright, warm sound. "Mr. Henderson," Vince said, a genuine regret in his voice, "I appreciate you thinking of me, but I just can't take on that kind of work anymore. My focus is elsewhere these days." He felt a small pang, a ghost of his old self, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of calm, of protection. He was guarding his energy now, fiercely, like a precious resource. He was saying no to distractions, to the low-impact busy work, because he had learned to say a bigger, more meaningful yes to what truly mattered. Later that day, as he watched Emily and Jacob chasing fireflies in the backyard, their laughter a sweet melody in the gathering twilight, a profound peace settled over him. Sarah joined him on the porch swing, leaning her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Remember all those sleepless nights, Vince?" she murmured, her voice soft. He nodded, a distant memory now, but still sharp enough to guide him. "Yeah, I was trying to fix everything, be everywhere, do it all. Thought that was what hard work meant, what being a good provider was." He paused, looking out at the fading light, at the first stars pricking through the darkening sky. "Turns out, I was just pushing every button I could find on the control panel, thinking one of them had to work. I was burning out the whole damn system, and the machine wasn't even moving." He took a deep breath, the evening air cool and clean. "What I learned, Sarah, is that there's usually just one button, maybe two, that actually makes the machine move. The big lever, the main gear. And once you find that, you gotta push that thing with everything you got. All the other buttons, they just burn out the battery." He leaned back on the swing, the rhythm of it a slow, comforting sway. The fireflies blinked, little dots of hope in the twilight, painting fleeting patterns in the humid air. And that's the way it is, isn't it? Life's always got a million buttons to push, 1,000 fires to put out, all clamoring for your attention, for your energy. But some fires ain't yours to fight, and some buttons ain't worth the push. The real trick, is finding the one that truly matters.